10,209th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Libya. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Libya to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. And in accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Hannah Sawatete, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, and Ms. Nissa Beck, Climate and SDG Localization Expert. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 on the agenda. Okay. I wish to draw the attention. No, this is. Apologies. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S 2026-661, the report of the Secretary General of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya. I now give the floor to Ms. Hannah Sawatete.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Security Council, Ambassador Tahir El-Sunni, Permanent Representative of the State of Libya. I would like to begin by thanking this Council for your steadfast support for UNSMIL and our efforts to advance the UNSMIL-facilitated political roadmap. This briefing will be slightly longer than previous ones in light of recent developments in Libya. The need to move Libya's political process forward remains crucial. The recent widespread electricity outages and public discontent, exacerbated by a prolonged heat wave, have exposed the consequences of institutional fragmentation, large-scale diversion of public resources, underinvestment, and uncoordinated decision-making, all of which are essentially failures of governance. Critical infrastructure is increasingly vulnerable to pressures that Libya cannot ignore due to its impact on people across all 3 regions of the country. This is why the political process is about more than bridging political differences. It is about restoring the state's capacity to provide for its people, manage its resources responsibly under unified institutions, provide security and create resilience to confront the various social, environmental, and other risks to which it is exposed. Madam President, I would like to recall the steps taken by UNSMIL to advance this objective. A year ago, I presented to this Council a roadmap that aims to help Libya move towards elections, end successive transitional arrangements, and restore the unity, cohesion, and legitimacy of its national institutions. It was grounded in the recommendations of the Advisory Committee and informed by consultations held across the country. The roadmap is based on 3 mutually reinforcing pillars: a credible path to presidential and legislative elections through electoral reforms, an inclusive structured dialogue to address governance challenges undermining peace and stability, and the reunification of executive institutions through a unified government and preparing the country for elections to ensure state authority has democratic legitimacy. In relation to the first pillar, progress on the reconstitution of the High National Elections Commission and the constitutional and legal framework stalled in the House of Representatives and High Council of State, despite our efforts to advance them through dialogue with the 2 chambers. Your Excellencies, members of Council, you would recall that by early 2026, it became clear that the impasse required a more focused mechanism. Thus, UNSMIL established a small convening, also known as the 4+4 Committee. Since its inaugural meeting on the 29th of April, the small convening has met 7 times under UNSMIL auspices, 4 of them since my last briefing. The next meeting will be convened on the 20th of August, and it is reaching its conclusion, having addressed some of the most contentious issues in the legal and constitutional framework of elections and the reconstitution of the board of HNEC. Remaining steps entail agreeing on mechanism for the endorsement of its outcomes. In parallel with the small convening, UNSMIL has advanced through another pillar of the roadmap with the successful completion on the 6th of June on the 6-month structured dialogue process. Its recommendations, which I presented to the Council in my last briefing, address governance, the economy, security, reconciliation, and human rights. These outcomes not only inform the immediate political process, but provide the beginnings of a national framework to guide current and future authorities in prioritizing reforms to unify and strengthen state institutions and build a more stable and prosperous Libya. On the 16th of August, we held a meeting with members of the political working group of the International Follow-up Committee on Libya of the Berlin process to apprise them of progress and seek their feedback on the ongoing implementation of the roadmap, bearing in mind the political challenges currently prevalent in Libya. As the small convening concludes its work, we are now considering how best to proceed with the next milestone of the roadmap, advancing the unification of government and institutions capable of leading the country towards elections. We count on the continued constructive engagement of Libyan stakeholders to advance this phase with broad national ownership and acceptance. UNSMIL will consult with Libyan stakeholders, members of the Security Council, and key international partners to adapt the roadmap where necessary, while remaining firmly anchored in its objectives and drawing on the provisions of existing political agreements, relevant legal frameworks, and the outcomes of the structured dialogue. Madam President, on the 29th of July, the High Council of State held its annual elections to renew its presidency bureau. I would like to congratulate the newly elected bureau and look forward to constructive engagement with members of the High Council of State in advancing the UNSMIL facilitated roadmap. The need to advance the political process is evident in the challenges affecting Libyans' daily lives. The government has a responsibility to ensure prudent financial management of the country's resources, to deliver public goods and services, and ensure the safety and security of the population, regardless of their location. This is the minimum expectation. Beyond this, greater economic stability and tangible improvements in people's lives would be of significant benefit. In July, major electricity blackouts affected large parts of the country, disrupting electricity and water supplies for hundreds of thousands of Libyans. These electricity cuts have continued into August. This follows the loss of generating capacity amid weeks of worsening controlled power cuts driven by fuel shortages, declining gas availability, and pressure on an already fragile electricity network. The contradiction is that this is occurring in a country that does not lack energy resources and has the largest petroleum deposits on the African continent. The crisis highlights a striking paradox. According to National Oil Corporation data, approximately $1 billion is spent monthly on fuel imports, yet electricity systems remain vulnerable to fuel shortages. Evidence of large-scale diversion of subsidized fuel in the electricity and security sectors, as I have highlighted in previous briefings, and as has also been reported by the panel of experts, underscores the need for stronger oversight, accountability, and coordination to ensure public resources are used to deliver the essential services Libyans depend on. The diversion of subsidized fuel is an unacceptable abuse of public resources, and those responsible must be investigated and held accountable. Libyans should not be paying the price for such practices. The same imperative applies to Libya's broader fiscal trajectory. In June, the Central Bank of Libya commenced implementing salary increases for military and security personnel in eastern Libya, following a request from the Libyan National Army in December 2025, and subsequent legislation for this by the House of Representatives. A similar request was reportedly made to the central bank from Western Libya. Any unplanned increase in recurrent expenditure, such as salaries and subsidized fuel, risks undermining the fiscal discipline envisaged under the Unified Development Program framework. This framework provides an important basis for managing fluctuating oil revenues and containing recurrent spending. It also seeks to direct revenue surpluses towards productive investment and the national oil company development under stronger oversight. However, full implementation of the UDP has regrettably stalled, although there are indications that efforts are underway to disperse tranches of the National Oil Corporation's operational allocations. The UDP's credibility will ultimately depend on whether its agreed parameters are respected and implemented. The House of Representatives and the High Council of State, who are signatories to the UDP agreement, also have oversight responsibilities regarding compliance with its framework and an obligation to ensure that the provisions of the relevant agreement are respected in their own decision-making processes. On the 9th of August, the governor of the Central Bank of Libya submitted a letter to the two chambers requesting to be relieved of his position. The move is an indication of the mounting pressure on the central bank, precisely the pressure the Unified Development Programme spending framework was intended to contain. The concerns raised by the governor should be treated with seriousness and a sense of urgency. We encourage the central bank to resume publication of its monthly revenue and expenditure bulletins as previously announced, in an effort to promote greater transparency and accountability. Madam President, recalling the challenges in facilitating the appointment of the current governor of the central bank in 2024, we believe it is important that all Libyan political actors and institutions fully assume their responsibilities to support the governor and the central bank in exercising their legitimate functions. This will ensure that the state can meet its financial obligations under the spending chapters of the budget. We also urge a strong effort to bring public expenditures under control and for the parties to adhere to the UDP parameters. The electricity crisis affects all areas of the country, but has also triggered public unrest, particularly in Western Libya. Following sporadic protests over power cuts in July, a more organized civil disobedience campaign from the 26th to the 29th of July involved roadblocks, strikes, and temporary disruption to key state and energy facilities. The protests, which included calls for a change of government, subsided after activists announced the reopening of state institutions on the 2nd of August. Separately, recent dialogue between the government and the deterrence apparatus for combating organized crime and terrorism has led to an agreement regarding security arrangements in the capital. This should help to de-escalate tensions in Tripoli and create space for a more inclusive approach to security arrangements, and I encourage continued engagement to consolidate this process. The security environment along Libya's western coast remains precarious amid competition among armed actors engaged in trafficking illicit drugs, human trafficking, and fuel smuggling. On the 3rd of August, heavy clashes erupted among these actors in residential areas across Zawiya and Soman, resulting in civilian deaths and injuries. Furthermore, the use of several drones against the oil refinery and other vital infrastructure in Zawiya is an emerging and worrying development, suggesting deliberate targeting of the oil facility, causing structural damage, risk of fire, and disruption of water supplies. On the 10th of August, the National Oil Corporation declared a state of emergency at the refinery and called for urgent investigations into these attacks. The strikes on civilian infrastructure require thorough investigation, and the perpetrators must be held accountable. This has broader implications, not only for Zawiya and Surman, but for the delivery of public goods and services to the wider population of the western region of the country. These events also underscore the urgent need for the development of professional, neutral, and unified security institutions capable of exercising effective authority under the rule of law. I welcome the formation of the Western Region Security Arrangements Committee by the Chief of Staff, General Namrush, led by a senior officer of the 5+5 Joint Military Commission, and the establishment and deployment of a joint military security force on the Western Coast Road to restore calm. These measures can be effective in ending violence if they receive appropriate support. And I urge the Prime Minister and the Government of National Unity to provide the required resources to address this situation on a sustainable basis. UNSMIL will continue to provide technical support to the Security Arrangements Committee and engage relevant political, security, municipal, and other local actors to help prevent further violence and restore peace on a more sustained basis. I would like to extend my deepest condolences to the families of those who lost their loved ones or sustained injuries during these clashes. We also note that Benghazi experienced a violent incident with the assassination of Major General Fauzi Manzouri, director of the Military Intelligence Department for the LNA, on the 10th of August in a reported car bombing. We condemn such acts of targeted violence and urge the authorities to investigate and hold those responsible accountable. My deepest condolences to his colleagues in the LNA and his loved ones on their loss. In a positive development, the two chiefs of general staff from the West and East, Salahuddin al-Namrush and Khalid Haftar, met in Sirte on the 12th of July. Attended by the 5+5 Joint Military Commission, the 3+3 Military Committee established under the US track and UNSMIL, the meeting demonstrated that practical confidence-building measures remain possible. The chiefs agreed on the principle to establish a joint border force and undertake joint exercises, regular coordination, and harmonized training. These agreed activities, when realized, would provide an important foundation for broader military unification efforts. Madam President, persistent violence in Libya underscores the need to preserve national security institutions. However, contested appointments risk further fragmentation. On the 28th of June, the Presidential Council issued decrees dismissing the director of the Libyan General Intelligence Service and appointing a successor, which were immediately contested by one of the vice presidents of the Presidential Council, prompting competing claims on procedural and legal grounds. I urge Libyan actors to peacefully resolve this dispute as per the Libyan political agreement through consensus to safeguard this institution's unity and national character. Regrettably, the fragmentation of the judiciary, as I have previously reported to this council, persists. The conflicting outcomes of judicial challenges filed in relation to the dismissal and appointment of the intelligence chief demonstrate why this situation also needs to be addressed urgently. Madam President, women in Libya continue to call for their equal, meaningful, and safe participation in public life. I'm concerned by the increase in hate speech, intimidation, and misinformation targeting women and seeking to silence or marginalize their voices. A video appeared on social media in July showing the public flogging of a woman by judicial police in Sapa. I welcome the prompt call for investigation by Libyan authorities, but this incident further underscores the urgent need to uphold due process, legal safeguards, and Libya's human rights obligations. These developments are fundamentally at odds with Libya's aspiration to play a stronger role in advancing regional and international peace and security, which require a demonstrated commitment to human rights, inclusion, dignity, and equality. Protecting women's rights and participation in all aspects of public life is indispensable to Libya's political transition and lasting peace. Meanwhile, efforts in eastern and western Libya to review detention cases and improve prison conditions continued, including through the holding of the first International Benghazi Conference on Justice and Reform on the 29th and 30th of July. These are important efforts that have to be translated into action. Critical legislative reforms, releasing those arbitrarily detained, granting independent monitors access to detention facilities, and investigating allegations of abuse. Anti-migration narratives and misinformation continue to harm vulnerable populations and constrain the humanitarian response. The prolonged closure of UNHCR's office has further limited access to essential protection services. I urge the authorities to safeguard humanitarian space, counter incitement, and uphold their responsibilities towards refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants in need of protection. Madam President, as I noted at the outset, climate pressures are making the consequences of divided and weak governance more severe in Libya. I therefore welcome the endorsement on the 7th of July of Libya's strategic climate framework, including its first nationally determined contribution, national adaptation plan, an initial national communication under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, alongside the National Water Security Strategy that was adopted in April. This framework establishes an important foundation for water security, renewable energy, and climate adaptation, and mobilizing international support. Its value will be measured not by what is adopted on paper, but what is implemented on the ground across Libya to deliver tangible results for its people. Madam President, the UNSMIL facilitated roadmap has made important progress. The structured dialogue concluded and the first two milestones of the roadmap have advanced, including on some of the more sensitive issues. However, it is important to note that progress does not solely require the efforts of UNSMIL, but a sustained willingness of the Libyan political actors to engage constructively. We will continue to work with all parties, holding discussions and consultations in an effort to address any concerns and misgivings and working to build trust to advance the roadmap. Establishing parallel tracks and initiatives can create opportunities for wasting time and forum shopping. We believe that this should be discouraged. We now enter a critical phase, advancing unified institutions and the conditions necessary for inclusive election. This requires political resolve and compromise from Libyan stakeholders with priority given to the national interest and the interest of Libyan people across the country. Sustained and coordinated international support is also essential. The roadmap may require more time than initially envisaged. This is not a loss of direction, but a necessary adaptation to political realities and the views of Libyan stakeholders and international partners. UNSMIL will continue its efforts to advance the process with determination. The path has been challenging, but progress is possible. It requires political will, acceptance of responsibility, and persistence by all key stakeholders. UNSMIL remains committed to supporting Libyans in building the legitimate and effective institutions that they deserve. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ms. Tete for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Nissa Beck.
Thank you, Madam President and distinguished members of the Security Council. I want to speak to you about something difficult to capture in a report. I want to speak about what it feels like to live in Libya today. It is sitting in your home in the middle of summer with no electricity. It is turning on the tap and wondering whether the water will come. It is queuing for fuel while knowing that your country is an oil and gas producer. It is going to the pharmacy and not finding the medicine you need. It's watching prices rise while the value of your income falls. For many Libyans, these are not separate problems. They are everyday life. And this is also where most Libyans experience the state. For most people, the state is not experienced through a constitution, an election, or a political agreement. It is experienced through whether the light comes on, whether water comes from the tap, whether the hospital works, whether someone responds when disaster comes. When those systems repeatedly fail, what is lost is not only electricity or water, it is confidence in the state itself. Extreme heat, water scarcity, and environmental shocks are now colliding with political division, armed insecurity, and institutions already struggling to function. That collision is a peace and security issue. The Libyan writer As-Sadiq al-Nayhoum said of Libya, "It is a country built of straw floating on lakes of oil, able to catch fire easily." He made that observation decades ago in a completely different Libya. I think about it today because Libya is still surrounded by wealth, while too many Libyans are living with insecurity, failing services, and institutions that struggles to protect them. Today, there's additional pressure on Libya's already fragile foundations. Our climate is changing. Libya's climate pressures are developing within an environment already affected by political division, insecurity, and weak public services. We often measure Libya's security by armed clashes, political agreements, and territorial control. Libyans experience security differently. Can my family stay safe during extreme heat when the electricity fails? Is the water entering my home safe to drink? Can the hospital function when the grid goes down? Will my city be protected when the next flood comes? Extreme heat puts more pressure on an already fragile electricity system. Water scarcity affects livelihood and heightened pressure within communities. Drought affects agriculture and economic opportunities. Floods expose weakness in infrastructure and preparedness. Political division and insecurity make it harder to maintain infrastructure, prepare for risks, and respond when crises occur. Climate shocks do not create Libya's political crisis, but they expose its weaknesses, deepen existing vulnerabilities, and increase the consequences of institutional failure. This is what climate insecurity looks like in Libya, and it requires us to think differently about what we mean when we talk about stability. The current electricity crisis makes this connection impossible to ignore. During the recent heat wave, people across Libya faced prolonged power cuts lasting up to 15 hours a day, as temperature approached 50 degrees Celsius. Protests spread across Tripoli and other cities, with people demanding not only electricity, but water, healthcare, fuel, medicine, and accountability. This was not simply an electricity crisis. It was an expression of a much deeper loss of confidence in the ability of the state to provide basic services. Libya's political leadership in the East and the West must be held accountable for the continued deterioration of essential services and the failure to protect the infrastructure of which civilians depend. Libya has the resources, the expertise, the human capacity to do better. Yet too many Libyans are still denied the most basic expectation of government, that essential services work and civilian infrastructure is protected. The issue is not that gas exported caused Libya's blackouts. They did not. The issue is that one of Africa's most energy-rich countries still cannot reliably provide electricity for its own citizens. That is a question of governance. And when people are left without electricity, water, or healthcare during extreme heat, it becomes a security concern. Any political settlement that does not improve the state's ability to deliver basics of daily life will struggle to restore public confidence in the state. The recent events in Zawiya show how quickly one crisis can trigger another. Drone attacks have targeted fuel storage and energy infrastructures around the Zawiya oil complex. Another attack on the South Zawiya power substation caused a major outage amid insecurity, leaving more than 700 megawatts of generation capacity unavailable. The consequences reached far beyond the facilities themselves. An attack on a substation does not end at the substation. It reaches the hospital relying on electricity, the water system relying on pumps, the business that cannot operate, and the family trying to survive extreme heat wave. Civilian infrastructure is not simply an economic asset, it is part of what keeps people alive and communities stable. No armed actor should be permitted to use Libya's electricity, water, or energy infrastructure as a tool of political or military pressure. Water is where climate security connection becomes even more visible. Libya already faces severe water scarcity and depends heavily on groundwater. Drought, rising temperature, and changing rainfall patterns are putting additional pressure on communities, agriculture, and livelihoods. In some places, the concern is not only whether people have water, it's whether the water they have is safe. A recent study of domestic wells in Western Tripoli found the majority of sampled wells did not meet drinking water standards, including evidence of contamination. In southern Libya, these pressures are particularly even more serious. Water scarcity, drought, and extreme heat are placing additional pressure on communities that already face limited services and economic opportunities. When access to water becomes harder, the pressure on local institutions and relations between communities can increase as well. This is why water security belongs in conflict prevention. When basic resources become less reliable and institutions are less able to respond, local grievances can quickly become political grievances. And these failures are not experienced equally. When water systems fail, healthcare becomes inaccessible and displacement increases, women often absorb the consequences inside the household long before those consequences appear in a national security assessment. We also need to be honest about the government. The continued deterioration of essential services is not simply bad luck. It reflects years of weak management, political division, poor accountability, and decisions that have too often placed political interest ahead of people's basic needs. Libyans should not have to protest before their basic needs are taken seriously. They should not have to search for drinking water during a heat wave. They should not have to depend on private generators to survive power cuts. And they should not have to wonder whether their institution will respond before the next crisis becomes a tragedy. These are not extraordinary demands. They are basic expectations citizens should be able to have of their institutions. At the same time, there are people already doing this work. Municipalities are often the first to respond when electricity fails, water becomes scarce, flood occurs, or displacement increases. Local civil society, women, and youth are helping communities respond to these pressures and prevent tensions from escalating. They're building trust, they're finding practical solutions, they're part of Libya's resilience. But too often, they are consulted after decisions have already been made, rather than treated as a partner in shaping those decisions. They should be supported not only as beneficiaries of peace building, but as the people already leading it. Madam President, I'd like to recommend the Council and the international partners to focus on 4 areas. First, make climate and environmental risk part of the UN conflict analysis and prevention work in Libya, including extreme heat, water stress, flooding, and threats to critical infrastructure, not as a separate agenda, but as part of understanding the pressures already affecting stability. Second, protect critical civilian infrastructure. Energy, water, electricity, and desalination facilities cannot become part of political armed conflicts. The Council and international partners should make clear that the attacks on or coercion involving or political interference with essential civilian infrastructure are unacceptable regardless of who is responsible. Third, support municipalities and local institutions. If municipalities are closest to the consequences, they need greater access to the risks and risk information and the financing and decision-making and the authority required to act before those consequences becomes crises. That means better climate and risk data, stronger contingency planning, functioning early warning systems, and resources that can move before emergencies occur. Fourth, support locally led peace building and resilience. Women, young people, and civil society should have a role in decisions, not only consultations, particularly around local resilience, reconstruction, and governance of natural resources and essential services. I want to return to As-Sadiq al-Nayhum. Decades ago, he looked at Libya's wealth and warned about the fragility of its foundations. Today, those foundations are being tested by political division, insecurity, and also by heat, water scarcity, drought, floods, and vulnerable infrastructures. For Libyans, peace can not only mean the absence of armed conflict. Peace is being able to turn on the lights. It's knowing that the water your children drink is safe. It is reaching hospitals and knowing that it can function. It's knowing that a heat wave, a flood, or an attack on a power station will not become a catastrophe simply because the institutions meant to protect you failed. That is why climate resilience is not separate from peace building in Libya. And that is why functioning institutions are not simply a development objective, they're part of our security. Libya has extraordinary resources. Its people should not have to live with extraordinary vulnerabilities. The rest of our political process should ultimately be whether Libyans can feel its results in their daily lives. That is peace we should be working towards. Thank you, Madam President and members of the Council.
I thank Ms. Beck for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, SRSG Tete and Ms. Beck. Welcome to the Permanent Representative of Libya. Madam President, 3 points on the political process, the importance of stability and human rights. First, the United Kingdom reaffirms our support for SRSG Tete and for all efforts aimed at advancing an inclusive, credible and Libyan-led political process. Almost a year ago, this Council welcomed SRSG Tete's briefing, setting out a roadmap towards elections in Libya and opening a window for making progress in Libya's political process. A year on, its 2 initial milestones remain to be implemented by Libya's parties. The people of Libya are telling us clearly that they want progress in the political process towards elections and unified, strengthened and accountable institutions. And we urge Libya's leaders to use this window of opportunity to act to implement the roadmap and move towards elections. 2 steps that Libya's leaders could take now to demonstrate both progress and determination to move forward: implementing the US-facilitated Unified Budget Agreement and finalising the outcome of the UNSMIL-facilitated 4+4 small convening discussions. Second, progress on the political process will support stability, which in turn offers the best prospects for greater economic certainty and a stable dinar, for jobs and youth employment, for stable fuel and essential goods and services supplies, and for all those things that Ms. Beck has described in her briefing. Conversely, when progress stalls, stability is put at risk. And in recent weeks, we have seen concerning signs. And we have heard this morning of some of them, including around the governor of the central bank, the assassination of the Libyan National Army military intelligence chief, and targeted drone attacks on critical infrastructure at Zawiya. We have also seen protests resulting from wider frustrations. It is the Libyan people who suffer most from any instability. The window for progress is open, but not indefinite. Third, protection of human rights. The United Kingdom welcomes announcements on the release of detained individuals in both West and East Libya. We encourage Libyan institutions to end the practice of arbitrary detentions, to empower law enforcement and legal institutions to investigate human rights violations and to pursue violators regardless of their affiliations, and to dismantle the criminal gangs responsible for organised immigration crime. As the Secretary-General's latest report shows, organised immigration crime creates protection risks, including of harassment, arbitrary arrest, and forcible transfer. It has a disproportionate impact on women and girls, and it risks fueling instability in Libya and beyond. Madam President, the United Kingdom wants democratic choice, security, and prosperity for the people of Libya. Through the mandate of this Council and the work of our UN mission, the international community is working to support the achievement of these goals. We see a window of opportunity now, and we urge and encourage progress in this window and support those who take the necessary steps to achieve it. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
President, we thank SRSG Hannah Tete for her briefing, and we appreciate UNSMIL's role in facilitating the political process and national reconciliation efforts in Libya. We also take note of the perspective shared by Ms. Nissa Beck, and I welcome the participation of the distinguished permanent representative of Libya in this meeting. Madam President, the Secretary General's latest report and the SRSG's briefing highlights both the encouraging developments and continuing challenges, underscoring the need for sustained dialogue and genuine compromise among relevant Libyan stakeholders. And evidently, many of the challenges confronting Libya are the responsibility of the state and state institutions. And we believe that they can be best addressed through national reconciliation and reunification. And that entails action in several key dimensions. First, our steadfast support for Libya's sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity. And our firm belief that an inclusive, Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process is the way forward for the country. Primary responsibility for that rests with the Libyan people, who are the ones who have to tread that path. Hence, the political will, a point repeatedly emphasized by the Special Representative. We are encouraged by UNSMIL's engagement through the smaller convening on the initial priorities of the political roadmap. We note the agreement reached on new mechanism for appointing the chairperson of the board of the High National Elections Commission and hope for an early agreement on outstanding issues concerning the first two targets of the roadmap. And we welcome all regional and international efforts, including by the US, aimed at supporting the UN-facilitated political process, and also note the roadmap announced on 18th June by the leadership of the Presidential Council, House of Representatives, and High Council of State. Also welcoming the conclusion of the structured dialogue, we hope that its recommendations would translate into practical actions, advancing institutional reunification and national reconciliation. Second, on the security track, we welcome continued engagement between the military and security institutions from eastern and western Libya, including the recent meeting in Sirte involving the military leadership and the 5+5 Joint Military Commission. We encourage sustained dialogue and confidence building to make progress towards unified military and security institutions. Third, we welcome positive steps towards greater fiscal coordination through the Unified Spending Framework for 2026. Its effective implementation can promote economic stability, fiscal discipline, transparency, accountability, and equitable management of national resources. Fourth, the importance of addressing the challenges facing Libya's judiciary, because judicial unity, rule of law, and strengthened constitutional oversight are essential to institutional stability. Madam President, we believe all these efforts and developments on various tracks would contribute to the overarching goal of national reconciliation and a unified government for durable peace and stability in Libya and well-being and prosperity of the Libyan people. And Pakistan will continue to extend its full support to this objective. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Hannah Tete, for her valuable updates. And we thank Nisa Beck, the Libyan civil society representative, for her considerations. We also welcome the permanent representative of Libya, who honors us today with his participation. 1 year on from the presentation of the UNSMIL roadmap, we appreciate the sustained efforts being made to move towards an end to the extended transition period in Libya. The conclusion of the structured dialogue in June, following 6 months of consultations, provided an important space for holistically addressing governance, economy, security, human rights, and national reconciliation challenges. On the other hand, since then, the small convening format meeting has made it possible to maintain the dialogue between the representatives of the major Libyan parties and to make progress as well on some elements, which demonstrates the value of always keeping dialogue channels open. However, at the same time, there continue to be significant differences that will need to be addressed for the process to be able to make progress. It is for the Libyan actors to, with the necessary political will, build the consensus that is needed on the election framework and to strengthen institutions that are able to lead the country towards a legitimate and sustainable political transition. Following years of institutional fragmentation, we appreciate parallel diplomatic efforts aimed at promoting greater coordination between the institutions of the state and to move towards more unified governance. In any case, the consolidation of legitimate and functional national institutions will be of vital importance, not only with a view to the election process, but also in order to respond to the daily and also pressing urgent needs of the Libyan population. Madam President, in this context, the security situation continues to be a key element for the stability of the political process. Although the truce agreed in Tripoli is holding, localized clashes and tensions between armed groups continue to represent serious risks. Drone attacks on the Zawiya oil facility caused a substantial fire which affected energy infrastructure. This is particularly worrying, given its implications for the protection of critical civilian infrastructure and the stability of the energy sector. Protests witnessed over extended power cuts and the deterioration of public services reflect the legitimate concerns of the population with regard to access to essential services and better living standards. When it comes to responding to these needs and improving the provision of public services, we encourage the urgent implementation of the 2026 Unified Budget Framework, as well as the transparent and responsible management of public resources. These challenges need to be addressed also while taking into account the climate pressures that Libya faces. The rise in temperatures, variable precipitation, and the increasing scarcity of water are unfortunately putting additional pressure on communities in which displacement, food insecurity, and cross-border mobility are overlapping. Panama considers that these challenges could also be turned into opportunities for strengthening cooperation. The National Water Security Strategy of Libya and the new Strategic Climate Framework provide a tangible basis for coordinated action. With a view towards strengthening climate adaptation and early warning systems, they constitute an investment in conflict prevention and long-term stability. Madam President, when it comes to sanctions, Panama reaffirms the importance of the effective and consistent implementation of the sanctions regime. As this Council reiterated in Resolution 2819 of 2026, it is essential to strengthen the implementation of the arms embargo and to prevent illicit transfers of arms to Libya. It is worrying that there continue to be criminal networks linked to smuggling and the illicit trade in oil, which are depriving the Libyan state of revenues and contributing to instability. We encourage the Libyan authorities and relevant states to strengthen cooperation and to protect the country's resources. On the other hand, we welcome the recent implementation assistance notices adopted by the 1970 Committee, including IAN number 6 and IAN number 8. They provide practical guidance for the effective preservation and management of frozen assets and the reinvestment of certain frozen reserves of the Libyan Investment Authority. We consider that these measures will help preserve the value of Libyan assets while at the same time maintaining the integrity of the freezing of assets that is provided for in the sanctions regime. We appreciate the fact that these measures aim to facilitate a more responsible and transparent management of assets in strict compliance with the provisions applicable under the sanctions regime. Madam President, the protection of the United Nations space for operating and the integrity of its personnel also deserves this Council's attention. We condemn incidents against UN facilities in Tripoli in June and disinformation campaigns targeting the United Nations relating to migrants and refugees. We reiterate that the safety and security of United Nations personnel and facilities must be guaranteed at all times. A year on from the presentation of the roadmap, the future of the political transition will depend on the will and ability of Libyan political actors and the Libyan people to achieve compromises that benefit the country. Panawal will continue to support the efforts of Special Representative Tete and UNSMIL in accompanying the political process, while also urging greater commitment on the part of Libyan actors to preserve the momentum of the political process, which will help build a stable, sovereign, and peaceful nation. Thank you very much.
Of Panama for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and to our briefers today, with a particular thanks to Special Representative Tete for her continued leadership of UNSMIL. Important work remains to reach durable nationwide unity. The United States continues to be encouraged by the trajectory of the Libyan-led political process and UNSMIL's roadmap. We welcome the conclusion of UNSMIL's nationwide structured dialogue as a meaningful step forward in a Libyan-owned process. The United States is proud of the substantial progress achieved this summer through our sustained, hands-on engagement with Libyan leaders from east to west. We have deepened engagement with Libyan stakeholders across the country, underscoring that unification must serve all Libyans and preserve Libya's sovereignty. We convened senior officials from both regions in Malta in July to advance concrete unification efforts. And after a U.S. congressional delegation visited Libya earlier this summer, Libyan defense leaders committed to 3 historic and tangible steps towards military unification: establishing a joint operations center in Sirte, an Air Force training center of excellence in Misrata, and an integrated air command. The United States continues to support full implementation of Libya's first unified national budget in 13 years, and we have engaged directly with Libyan economic leaders to strengthen investment and the business climate. These U.S. efforts are fully complementary to UNSMIL's roadmap. On sanctions, the United States works closely with the 1970 Committee panel of experts to support their reporting on sanctions invasion. We look forward to the panel's next report on armed groups' control of oil revenue and the increase of oil and fuel smuggling. Real momentum exists. We urge continued Libyan and international support to turn this progress into lasting peace and unified institutions. Thank you.
Representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Thank you, Madam President. We are grateful for the presentation given by Special Representative Ms. Hannah Sewatete, as well as for the information provided by Ms. Nisa Beck. We welcome the presence of the permanent representative of Libya at today's meeting. Moreover, we appreciate the most recent report presented by the Secretary General, in which he provides an invaluable update on the reality on the ground. Colombia reiterates its staunch support for UNSMIL's work, as well as for the roadmap put forward by the United Nations to overcome the political impasse and to move towards unified institutions. In this connection, Colombia hails the dialogue initiatives championed by UNSMIL to find common ground between the parties and to create room for understandings that will ultimately allow national consensuses to emerge. Moreover, Colombia recognizes the mediation efforts that several international stakeholders have been spearheading to support Libya's stability and reunification. More specifically, we underscore the work done by the United States to promote dialogue between the parties and to facilitate progress towards institutional reunification. It is important that these initiatives complement and buttress the political process facilitated by the United Nations, while fully upholding the principle that it is incumbent upon the Libyans to define the future of their own country. In line with our position that any lasting solution must be Libyan-led and Libyan-owned, my delegation appeals to national stakeholders and institutions to assume the primary responsibility for reaching the political agreements necessary to restore stability and preserve the state's unity. Colombia commends progress made in terms of establishing the National Electoral Commission, as well as the review of the electoral legal framework and the resumption of necessary discussions on the necessary arrangements to forge ahead with the electoral process. We should point to the will expressed by the millions of Libyan citizens registered to vote. Their registration reflects the people's ambitions to have unified and representative institutions. At the same time, the fragile security situation continues to be a source of concern. The persistence of armed incidents and acts of violence, together with the fragility of the broader environment, point to the need for efforts to be stepped up to strengthen institutional stability, as well as to make progress with the reunification of state structures and to consolidate security cooperation. My country reaffirms that the security and safety of UN personnel is a vital prerequisite for ensuring that the mission can discharge its mandate. Colombia condemns all threats, acts of violence and vandalism targeting the United Nations. We reiterate our appeal to all Libyan authorities and stakeholders to guarantee the protection of UN personnel, as well as the protection of the organization's operations and facilities in accordance with international law. To conclude, Madam President, Colombia reiterates its unwavering support for the work of UNSMIL and for its roadmap. My delegation is of the view that it is vital that that roadmap retain the primacy and central role that it must enjoy as the framework within which to shape the Libyan political process. Thank you.
Representative of Colombia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely Liberia, Somalia, and my own country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Hannah Tete, for her detailed briefing and for her steadfast and continued engagement with Libyan stakeholders. The A3 reaffirmed their full support for her good offices and for the efforts made by the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL, to advance a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process. We welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Libya in this meeting. Madam President, the A3 commends the resilience, will, and determination of the Libyan people for their perseverance and commitment to charting and striving for a peaceful, democratic path forward for Libya's future in the face of persistent challenges. We encourage these fraternal people to resolutely maintain this momentum in order to overcome divisions, consolidate national unity, and bring to fruition an inclusive, Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process. Over the past months, UNSMIL has worked closely with Libyan stakeholders to build consensus around the political roadmap launched in August 2025 and facilitated under UNSMIL, with the ultimate goal of enabling national elections and the reunification of state institutions. In this regard, the A3 welcomes the progress achieved under the UNSMIL facilitated roadmap, particularly the consultations with Libyan actors, the work of the 6+6 committee, and the structured dialogue, which provide essential frameworks for bridging positions and reaching consensus on the institutional and electoral arrangements necessary to complete the transition. These efforts, supported by inclusive, broad-based consultations, reaching thousands of citizens and ensuring the voices of women, youth, and marginalized communities are heard, demonstrate the resolve of Libyans to reclaim ownership of their country's future. The upcoming August meeting to advance agreement on the electoral process represents a pivotal moment and an important step. It is an opportunity for all parties to demonstrate leadership, continue consultations to overcome persistent stalemates, and reaffirm a shared commitment to Libya's unity and democratic aspirations. Equally vital is the implementation of the recommendations resulting from the UN structured dialogue, particularly the establishment of unified and legitimate governance in a single executive authority that is effective and that can guide the country through the transitional period and lay the groundwork for sustainable peace and development. We encourage all parties to prioritize dialogue, compromise, and consensus in order to overcome institutional divisions and advance an inclusive, Libyan-led political process. Madam President, on the security track, the A3 welcomes the contacts established between military and security institutions in the East and West, as well as the efforts of the 5+5 Joint Military Commission. The A3 recognizes the continued resilience of the truce reached in Tripoli in May 2025, which has largely held despite ongoing competition among security actors and lingering tensions between forces aligned with the Government of National Unity and those in opposition. While localized incidents, including recent clashes in Zawiya, underscore the fragility of the security environment and the human cost of unresolved rivalries, Libyan communities and leaders have shown restraint and a desire to prevent escalation. In southern Libya, recent confrontations between the Southern Liberation Operations Room and the Libyan National Army, alongside intensified patrols and efforts to secure borders, highlight the pressing need for coordinated and inclusive security sector reform and the gradual unification of Libyan military and security institutions. While progress has been made, the security situation remains precarious and demands urgent collective action. We urge all Libyan parties to prioritize dialogue, refrain from any action likely to fuel tensions, uphold the existing ceasefires, and move towards unified and professional security arrangements under legitimate civilian authority that protect all civilians, restore trust, and create the conditions necessary and conducive for credible elections and long-term stability that the Libyan people deserve. Madam President, on the economic track, the A3 highlights the importance of consolidating the stability and resilience of the Libyan economy. To this end, we encourage the Libyan authorities to continue their efforts to strengthen coordination between financial institutions in the East and West. to improve transparency and ensure the optimal and equitable management of national resources. These efforts will help preserve monetary stability, support the implementation of economic reforms, reduce regional disparities, and strengthen confidence in institutions and public finances for the benefit of all Libyans. Regarding Libya's frozen assets, the A3 expresses its deep concern over any continued erosion of Libya's frozen assets or their value due to misuse, mismanagement, or any practices that could jeopardize their preservation by certain international financial institutions. We reiterate that these assets are frozen for the sole purpose of protecting and preserving their value for the benefit of the Libyan people, and not to serve the interests of or benefit the institutions holding or managing the funds. The A3 demands full accountability, including reparations and compensation for such violations, and emphasizes the need to continue to support comprehensive audits by the Libyan Investment Authority to verify and determine the aggregate amount, location, and the status of all frozen assets. Lastly, on the humanitarian aspect, the A3 pays particular attention to the situation of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers transiting through Libya. We welcome the cooperation between the Libyan authorities, the United Nations, and relevant regional and international organizations, and encourage its continuation to help protect vulnerable individuals and uphold their dignity and rights. We also encourage strengthened cooperation between Libya and its neighbors to address, in a spirit of partnership, common challenges related to border security, human trafficking, migrant smuggling, and transnational organized crime, in compliance with international obligations and human rights. To conclude, Madam President, the A3 reaffirms its unwavering support for the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Libya. Our objective remains clear: a peaceful, inclusive, and Libyan-led political solution, and a united Libya governed by legitimate and accountable institutions able to deliver security, dignity, and prosperity to its people, while contributing to peace and stability across the African continent. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Democratic Republic of the Congo for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madam President, I wish first and foremost to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Hannah Tete, for her briefing, and I thank her also for her efforts to bring about an inclusive political solution in Libya. France fully supports her work and calls upon all Libyan actors to seize this opportunity and to engage in good faith in this process in order to allow the Libyan people to live in a stable, sovereign, and united country. Madam President, I wish to emphasize 4 points. First, UN mediation through its roadmap and the dialogue undertaken with Libyan stakeholders charts a clear course. The goal is to reunify Libyan institutions and to allow the holding of presidential and legislative elections. We will continue to support UNSMIL's pragmatic efforts to achieve the goals established by the roadmap. These are clear demands coming from the Libyan people. We encourage Libyan political actors to commit to this process in a constructive way and with a sense of accountability in order to move beyond their differences. As we have already recalled, maintaining the status quo is more costly than the search for a compromise. Secondly, Libya's unity is a vital prerequisite to its stability and for its ability to respond to security risks. The security situation remains volatile, as illustrated by recent drone strikes targeting energy infrastructure in Zawiya and the killing of the Libyan National Army's military intelligence director in Benghazi. The reunification of the army and security services is a priority. That goal is predicated upon the presence of a unified countrywide government as a prerequisite to guarantee long-term stability of the security situation. It's vital that the withdrawal of mercenaries, combatants and foreign forces continue in Libya so that this country can restore full sovereignty. My third point, greater budgetary transparency and a more balanced distribution of national wealth for the benefit of the Libyan people are all necessary. The lack of political unity is fueling the socio-economic difficulties besetting the Libyan people. We encourage all initiatives to foster Libya's economic reunification. France is closely following the implementation of the Unified Development Programme to encourage an efficient and transparent management of public resources. We encourage Libyan stakeholders to support efforts underway at Libyan institutions, namely those at the central bank, in pursuit of this goal. The fight against corruption and trafficking must also be stepped up. We are concerned to note oil shortages throughout the country. This is affecting the most vulnerable people. At the same time, criminal smuggling networks are growing richer. It is vital to restore the national oil companies' full independence and full control if we are to counter this scourge. This institution must be able to guarantee the national character of the resource that it manages. President, the human rights situation in Libya remains a source of concern. We call upon all Libyan parties to respect the fundamental rights of both Libyan nationals and migrants. Tangible measures must be taken to combat trafficking in persons, as well as violations of international law and international human rights law. The fight against disinformation and hate speech is also vital. We support UNSMIL's work in this regard. Madam President, to conclude, France reiterates its support for Libya's unity, stability and sovereignty. The impasse has gone on for too long. It is incumbent upon this Council to work with resolve to bring about an inclusive political solution that the Libyan people and the international community as a whole wish to see. Thank you.
For the statement, I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Madam President, we thank SRG Tete for her briefing and Ms. Beck for the insightful remarks. We also welcome the participation of the representative of Libya to this meeting. It has been 1 year since SRG Tete presented the political roadmap aimed at facilitating credible elections and fostering long-term stability in Libya. We welcome the efforts of SRG and the entire UNSMIL team, and we reiterate our strong support for their work. We all know that the process has not been easy, but despite a period of uncertainty and difficult choices, we note that the progress achieved through the convenings of the smaller 4+4 group demonstrates that there is a momentum. The agreement on the mechanism for appointing the head of the High National Election Commission is a positive indication of this. We urge all parties to build on this positive momentum and continue their engagement on a path towards national elections in Libya, an inclusive, Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process. Following the conclusion of the structured dialogue, it is important that its recommendations are duly considered and taken forward. Madam President, despite the progress made, worrying signs remain, and Libya's security and economic situation continues to be fragile. Recent violence in Benghazi, Zawiya, and Sorman, leading to loss of life and endangering civilians, only highlights the persistent volatility and the risk of further escalation. We call for those responsible to be held accountable and all actors to exercise maximum restraint and prioritize dialogue as the only viable path forward. We also note the use of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech for political purposes and call on the Libyan authorities to take all necessary measures to protect UN personnel, premises, and operations in accordance with international law. As another point of concern, the judiciary remains divided, which not only has implications for the prospects of national unity, but also undermines public trust in state institutions. We call on all parties to refrain from forum shopping, negotiate in good faith, and put the interests of the Libyan people above narrow self-interest. Today's powerful and personal testimony by Ms. Beck also highlighted that Libya faces intersecting climate and security challenges. As stated during the stakeout before the meeting, we call on the Libyan authorities to integrate climate risks into national planning by strengthening coordination and institutional capacity. Madam President, in conclusion, the road towards stability and inclusive and credible elections in Libya can only be completed if the interests of the Libyan people are put first and if there is a constructive dialogue and stronger coordination among the main political actors. I thank you.
Representative of Latvia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Special Representative Tete, Ms. Becker and Ms. Beck for their briefings. Welcome the presence of the representative of Libya at today's meeting. Recently, Libya has made notable progress in its political process, and revenues from oil and gas exports have increased significantly. At the same time, the country continues to face myriad difficulties, including unresolved fundamental political differences, rising localized security risks, and persistent macroeconomic pressures. The international community must pursue a multi-track approach and work toward a comprehensive, integrated, and fundamental solution to the Libyan conundrum. I wish to emphasize 3 points. First, sincere dialogue must be upheld to break the political deadlock. The United Nations has recently worked actively to advance the political roadmap and progress in the 4x4 mini-dialogue. The Libyan parties concerned should fully recognize that the continued division of state institutions and repeated postponements of elections are detrimental to the country's long-term development and the fundamental interests of Libyan people. China calls on all parties, with the support of the United Nations, to intensify consultations, bridge their differences, and reach agreement as soon as possible on the matters set up in the roadmap, thereby paving the way for national elections. UNSMIL, on this part, should focus on maintaining dialogue with Libya's major political forces in pursuit of broad-based support. The UN should play, as always, the central role in mediating the Libyan issue. Efforts by external actors should adhere to the Libyan-led and Libyan-owned principle, while fully respecting Libya's national conditions and wishes of its people. Second, the ceasefire gains must be preserved and further escalation prevented. Recently, successive violent clashes have occurred in Zawiya and elsewhere, and critical facilities such as oil refineries have been deliberately targeted by drone attacks, threatening civilian safety and possibly disrupting energy supplies and adversely affecting people's livelihoods. China is seriously concerned about these developments. We urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint, cease all violent attacks, support the investigation and accountability efforts by the Libyan authorities vis-à-vis the related attacks, and ensure the protection of civilians as well as critical infrastructure, including energy facilities. The 2020 ceasefire agreement remains a key foundation for maintaining Libya's overall stability. The parties in eastern and western Libya should fully implement the agreement, strengthen dialogue, consolidate mutual trust, and advance the unification of military and security institutions across the country. Third, public governance should be improved and the well-being of the people enhanced. Libya continues to face significant challenges, including fiscal deficits, rising prices, and fuel shortages, all detrimental to sound economic development and sustained social stability. Both the East and West should promptly implement the unified budget already agreed upon, ensure the fair and transparent management of oil revenues, and maintain the stability of the country's macro-financial governance framework and policies. Libya's frozen assets are the shared wealth of the Libyan people, deserving of full protection. In this past May, while serving as the president of the Security Council and acting chair of the Libya Sanctions Committee, China updated, building upon the previous work by all parties, the draft implementation assistance notice on arrangements for the reinvestment of frozen cash reserves. We welcome the consensus reached on this issue last month and call upon the international community to continue exploring practical arrangements that help preserve and increase the value of Libya's frozen assets. President, as we speak, Libya stands at a critical crossroads. The international community should earnestly respect Libya's sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity, uphold objectivity and impartiality, intensify mediation and diplomatic efforts, and play a constructive role by dedicated itself genuinely to promoting peace, stability, and well-being of Libyan people. As a good friend of Libya, China stands ready to continue working with the international community to contribute more to advancing a political settlement of the Libya issue and Libya's long-term peace and stability. I thank you, President.
Anna, for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. We're grateful to the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Libya and head of the UN support mission in the country, Hanna Tete, for her briefing. We listened closely to Ms. Nisse Beck, and we welcome the participation in today's meeting of the Permanent Representative of Libya, Tahir Souni. The domestic political situation in the country continues to worsen. Libyan leaders are not able to overcome their disunity. Many organs of governance, including financial and judicial ones, continue to work in parallel, essentially duplicating one another's functions. Against the backdrop of the drawn-out crisis of statehood, accumulated problems are also emerging in the economic and security spheres, leading to a general erosion of order and growing public discontent. Last month, across the country, there were waves of popular protests. The military situation on the ground is also worsening, as indicated by the killing in Benghazi of a senior East Libyan military officer, Fawzi al-Mansouri, as well as lengthy clashes at the beginning of August around the oil refinery in Zawiya. During the latter event, it is reported that attack drones were actively used. This could indicate that there are still serious gaps in the country's arms embargo, which is a growing problem for Libya. We call for strict compliance with the Security Council's restrictions. We proceed from the understanding that the panel of experts of the Security Council 1970 Committee on Libyan Sanctions should thoroughly trace and document such cases. Madam President, it is worth recalling that the end goal of the Libyan political process is the unification of the entire country through the holding of general nationwide elections. But such a far-reaching task requires solutions to, first and foremost, fundamental political questions. As practice shows, that can only be achieved through inclusive dialogue with the involvement of all influential political forces in Libya. We call upon its leaders to constructively and in good faith interact with international mediation, the cornerstone of which is UNSMIL. We express our support for the tireless efforts of SRSG Tete aimed at harmonizing approaches to the peace process and finding compromises that are acceptable to all parties. We are closely monitoring the implementation of the initiatives proposed by the Special Representative, including the small convening format work. But we underscore that any agreements between its participants will have to be formalized in Libyan law. In that regard, we believe it is important to take into account the initial legal framework of the political process that was established by the Skhirat Agreement and the Constitutional Declaration, including the amendments to it. What Libya needs now isn't original ideas to get the country out of the crisis, which in large part are born out of these various different discussion formats, but rather it needs scrupulous work to implement the established parameters of the peace process in line with intra-Libyan agreements. The results of UNSMIL's structured dialogue made it possible to, as we know, take the temperature of public sentiments. However, the value of its recommendations is directly proportional to the willingness of Libyan protagonists to follow those recommendations. Madam President, in the current circumstances, it would be counterproductive to set aside the attempts of authoritative actors in the country to invigorate the political process. We see a great deal of potential in the tripartite format between the Presidential Council, the House of Representatives, and the High Council of State. We welcome the signing by the participants of the Declaration of Principles on Ending the Transitional Period, which involves the creation of a legal framework and conditions for holding simultaneous presidential and parliamentary elections no later than the 17th of February 2027. We are also convinced that combining mediation by individual external actors with the relevant UN efforts will make it possible to achieve the most effective result. A good example of this synergy is the Berlin process on Libya in its initial configuration. If the different processes contradict one another, that will only introduce confusion into Libyan politics and undermine Libyans' trust in attempts to help them. In conclusion, we underscore our commitment to the independence, territorial integrity, sovereignty, and unity of friendly Libya. Thank you very much.
Thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank SRSG Tete for her comprehensive briefing and for her continued efforts to advance the political process in Libya. I would also like to thank Ms. Beck for her remarks, and I welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Libya in this meeting. Madam President, Greece considers Libya an important partner for stability, security and prosperity in our region. We remain firmly committed to supporting the UN-led political process and to further strengthening our bilateral cooperation with Libya. Continuing instability across the wider region underscores the importance of a unified and stable Libya with effective and functioning state institutions and a sustainable and inclusive political settlement. The UN-led framework remains the most credible path towards achieving these objectives. We welcome initiatives that promote dialogue and confidence building among Libyan stakeholders, provided they reinforce and complement the UN-led process and contribute to a lasting settlement based on Libyan ownership and broad national consensus. We encourage all Libyan actors to overcome entrenched divisions and engage constructively in a genuinely Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process. Creating the necessary conditions for free, fair, transparent, inclusive and credible presidential and parliamentary elections must remain a priority. In this regard, we call on all stakeholders to participate constructively in the next steps outlined by the Special Representative and to seize the opportunity to move Libya towards unified institutions and bring an end to the prolonged transitional period. Madam President, we welcome the conclusion of the structured dialogue and believe that its recommendations can provide a useful basis for addressing long-standing challenges and building greater consensus on the way forward. We urge all stakeholders to translate these recommendations into concrete actions and to ensure their effective implementation. We also note the progress made towards establishing a unified national budget facilitated by the United States, as well as continued efforts to strengthen security coordination among Libyan institutions across the country. We support further efforts towards a unified national security architecture. Against the backdrop of growing environmental challenges, we further welcome Libya's adoption of its first strategic climate framework under the Paris Agreement. Nevertheless, serious challenges remain. The fragmentation of the judiciary continues to undermine the rule of law and institutional unity, while the security situation remains fragile, as demonstrated by the recent clashes in Zawiya. Political progress must be accompanied by tangible and verifiable steps towards the withdrawal of all foreign forces, fighters and mercenaries in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions and with full respect for Libya's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Migration and refugee movements also remain a major regional concern. A comprehensive approach is needed that addresses the root causes of displacement, strengthens protection for migrants and refugees, and effectively combats trafficking and smuggling networks. Greece continues to engage closely with Libya in addressing irregular migration with full respect for international law, including applicable international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We are also concerned by misinformation, disinformation, threats and hate speech targeting refugees, migrants and UN personnel. Such actions heighten protection risks, fuel hostility towards humanitarian actors, and undermine social cohesion. They must cease. Madam President, regarding the sanctions regime, we particularly welcome the issuance of the Implementation Assistance Notice concerning paragraph 14 of Resolution 2769. This is a significant and positive step. We hope that this guidance will provide greater legal clarity, facilitate the effective administration of Libyan Investment Authority funds, help address instances of overcompliance, and contribute to the proper management for the benefit of the Libyan people while fully preserving the integrity of the sanctions regime. In conclusion, Madam President, as a long-standing friend and partner of Libya, Greece remains firmly committed to its sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity. We will continue to support efforts towards a stable, secure, and prosperous Libya, at peace with itself and maintaining constructive relations with all its neighbors. We look forward to a Libya free from external interference, with unified national institutions exercising full authority throughout its territory and contributing to peace, stability, and prosperity across our shared region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
Madam President, I would like to thank Ms. Hana Serwa Tete, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Libya, for her valuable briefing. I would also like to welcome the participation of the permanent representative of the sisterly state of Libya, His Excellency Ambassador Tahir al-Sunni. And I would like to thank the representative of the civil society for her briefing. This August coincides with the first anniversary of UNSMIL's launch of a roadmap aimed at addressing the Libyan crisis. On this occasion, the Kingdom of Bahrain renews its full support to the UNSMIL and its efforts aimed at facilitating a comprehensive Libyan-owned, Libyan-led process that will lead to presidential and legislative elections, unification of state institutions under a unified government, and putting an end to the successive transitional phases. The Kingdom stresses that restoring peace and stability in Libya can only be achieved through the political track, with the support of the international community and the commitment of all parties to their shared responsibility to ensure its success. This will spare the Libyan people further instability and risks, safeguard its security and stability, and meet their aspirations for development and prosperity. In this vein, I would like to touch the following points. First, the Kingdom of Bahrain expresses its deep concern over the recent clashes in Al Zawiya and Sarman that led to losses in lives and injuries, in addition to the material damage to public and private properties. We urge all parties to immediately halt fighting and any provocative action that might lead to further escalation or instability. This would threaten the peace and stability of the Libyan people and would disrupt their daily lives. It also portends wider repercussions on the security and stability of Libya. The Kingdom also expresses its deep concern over the targeting of a fuel tank in the Zawiya refinery of the National Oil Corporation using a drone. We are also concerned over the targeting of a power generation plant belonging to the General Electricity Company that led to power outage across large areas of the country. This is a direct violation of the IHL on the protection of civilian objects. We warn that the targeting of civilian objects and critical infrastructure constitutes a dangerous and unacceptable approach. We have witnessed it in Libya as well as in the Arab Gulf area. The citizens bear the direct brunt of such attacks on their security and livelihood. We stress the need for an immediate halt of such aggressions and hold their perpetrators accountable. Second, the Kingdom reiterates its support to the continuation of the meetings of the small convening 4+4 committee facilitated by the UNSMIL. It aims at addressing the controversial matters obstructing the holding of elections. We welcome the consensus on a mechanism to appoint the president of the Higher National Elections Commission following delays in implementing the previously agreed upon mechanism. We look forward to reaching consensus on all other outstanding matters. Third, reaching an understanding on the mechanism to organize elections does not necessarily mean their success or their actual holding. We need a real breakthrough, and this requires prioritizing Libya's interests and the interests of its people over any other interests or considerations, while implementing concrete and pragmatic steps within clear time frames. The Kingdom stresses that the Libyan people remain the primary victims of this continued competition among different actors. We look forward to ending the successive, prolonged transitional phases which have turned into a vicious circle. Thus, the Kingdom underlines the need for all parties to put the future of Libya and the security of its people and their prosperity above all other interests. They must work seriously to ensure the success of all initiatives aimed at resolving the crisis. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Denmark. Let me start by thanking SRSG Tete for her briefing and welcome the representative of Libya to our meeting today. Let me also give a special thanks to Ms. Nissa Beck for bringing her perspectives to the Council, including on the adverse impact of climate change on the lives and security of the Libyan people. I will make 3 points. First, as we've heard, it's 1 year since the UNSMIL roadmap was launched. Denmark continues to support the UN-led mediation efforts, and we commend the efforts of SRSG Tete to this end. We urge Libyan political stakeholders to narrow their differences and put the interest of the people first. In this vein, we welcome the progress made in the small group convenings. Denmark encourages the parties to redouble their efforts to complete the first 2 milestones of the roadmap to create the conditions for holding national elections. Further, the recommendations of the structured dialogues reflect the aspirations of Libyans for a stable and prosperous state with effective governance. We encourage Libyan political leaders to implement them. Second, Denmark is concerned about the volatile security situation in Libya. Unresolved political deadlock hampers unified state security control. This was clear in the recent armed clashes, which endangered civilians and damaged critical infrastructure, including Zawiya refinery. Denmark strongly condemns these clashes. We call for de-escalation and stress the need for all actors to refrain from further violence. Effective measures to protect civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law and human rights law must be taken. Third, and finally, as Ms. Beck clearly outlined, Libya faces growing climate-related risks, including water scarcity and rising temperatures. When combined with weak infrastructure and institutional fragmentation, climate pressures can have a devastating impact on livelihoods and prosperity. These risks must therefore be factored into peace-building, conflict prevention, and local mediation efforts. We urge the international community to support the Libyan authorities in addressing these challenges to strengthen resilience and translate climate commitment into action. As we've heard, this will have a clear impact on the lives of the people of Libya. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. And I now give the floor to the representative of Libya.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I wish you all the luck during the presidency of the Council in this month. I would also like to thank Mrs. Hannah Tete for her briefing. We took note of all what was mentioned. We'd also like to thank Ms. Nissa for her briefing, which expresses the opinion of a large part of the people who've been suffering for years and have been frustrated from such meetings and all they want are pragmatic, concrete results. Therefore, before we deliver our statement, we must reiterate once again that holding such meetings must be accompanied by a real will to break this vicious circle of political effort. We have to overcome the traditional approaches and move towards concrete measures that would meet the aspirations of the Libyan people for stability. Libya must be lifted from the scourge of Chapter 7 to put an end to all those chapters. This is a shared responsibility on all our shoulders. Ladies and gentlemen, we commend the progress that was announced by the special representative in her briefing today and all the arrangements reached between the two main parties in the 4+4 committee. This was achieved in a relatively short time during the negotiations over the past 2 months on consensus on the draft laws for the presidential and parliamentary elections and the mechanism to appoint the president of the High National Electoral Commission. We stress that such laws are not an end in themselves. Instead, they are the only tool that would empower the Libyan people to exercise their right to choose their leaders and shape their institutions. No political track can be legitimate without being based on the voice of the people. We reiterate the need to respect all national initiatives and dialogues that respond to the aspirations of the Libyan people. They have to result in a direct and not interpretable way to an end of all transitional phases. It has to come through fair and free elections, through just laws that do not exclude anyone and are applicable. We welcome any constructive international effort to support the national dialogue and put an end to the divisions. But it has to be Libyan-owned and Libyan-led, complementary to the UN framework and the decisions of the relevant Security Council resolutions. We underlined that the Libyan ownership of the political process must not be just a slogan that is repeated without being reflected in practical terms, although the Libyan people do care for the ownership of their political decision, but the amount of international interference in the Libyan process has had its impact on so many levels. Therefore, there is a need for an international role that supports the national will, not instead of. It must support the Libyan institutions, not overcoming them. The Libyan ownership must move from an announced principle to a practical implementation that respects the right of the Libyan people to decide on the future of their country. Ladies and gentlemen, under such exceptional circumstances in Libya, we appreciate all international effort to support the economic path and the unification of the budget, as well as the Unified Development Program. However, we must now investigate the reasons behind the non-implementation following 9 months since the signing of the agreement and the timetable of the implementation. We find that it is dangerous that there are still challenges obstructing the implementation. Adjusting this file can no longer be delayed. It is a national priority to respect the Libyan dinar and safeguard our monetary process from any dangers. In this vein, and to ensure the success of such agreements, we call upon everyone to support the independence of the Central Bank of Libya, to ensure its prerogatives legally and financially away from any political pressures. It is high time for this agreement to be implemented. It has to be announced to the public and state institutions, especially the auditing institutions, to ensure the transparency, accountability, and commitment of all to its provisions. The deterioration of the basic services provided to the citizens, as we have heard from Mrs. Nisa today, and the continued livelihood crises, foremost the energy and power crises, is no longer linked to technical matters or lack of resources. It is also linked to the corruption networks and the smuggling, trafficking of the oil. These are dangerous crimes that have devastating consequences on equal footing to criminal problems. Therefore, even though we welcome the decision of the Sanctions Committee on the 22nd of July, but this begs the question, how can the international community accept the designation of one ship while there are entire fleets that smuggle our oil before the eyes of the international community? We call upon this Council and the Sanctions Committee to move with determination to ensure the accountability of all entities and networks and their supporters locally and internationally without selectivity, for they are known to all in this council. Such steps and others will ensure transparency and accountability on the revenues of oil and other marketing contracts, as was stated in the reports of the experts. In the same vein, we welcome the adoption by the Sanctions Committee on the 6th of June, their agreement that allows the Libyan Investment Authority to retain the revenues of the Libyan frozen assets. This is what we have asked for time and again, to preserve the money and treasure of the Libyan people that are depleted. It is unacceptable that the Libyans' money will remain in foreign banks that are benefiting from it and are also taking huge revenues while their real value is being depleted due to inflation. This is structured theft that we will not allow. Talking about sanctions, we would like to recall once again that it is necessary to lift the names of many Libyans that for years have no reason to be designated, whether they are representatives of the old regime or others. It's not acceptable that such names will remain on the designation list. We have to also look into the humanitarian side of such cases. We call upon the international community to support all military tracks dialogue and security meetings that garner all security and military representatives. We believe that such contact is a real safeguard against the fall into confrontations that cost the Libyan people a lot. The Government of National Unity continues to implement a progressive plan to adjust the military and security situation. It is the strategy that started in 2021 based on a practical approach towards the current arrangements. We are trying to guide their work in line with the needs of the government and its institutions, and ensure a restructuring and reformulation of different battalions to ensure the protection of the citizens and its structures. We have moved through different tracks, through measures that have put an end to certain arrangements or the tasks that no longer meet the needs of the state, in addition to other paths that would ensure redirecting and re-guiding the capabilities in line with the state capabilities. In this vein, we condemn and strongly reject the political assassination approach or reliance on violence in any way, as well as the targeting of critical state institutions and oil institutions. These are dangerous steps that beg the question, what are the agendas adopted that would only push the country towards a vicious circle of violence. The Libyan people have suffered for years from violence and assassinations. These people look for courageous steps that would unify our military under one united civilian authority, preventing the use of weapons that would only fall in the hands of the state and refrain from any foreign military presence on our country. Permanent security will only be achieved by ending all other military actions that are unlawful, because this is the cornerstone to ensure political settlement and its protection. To conclude, we reiterate that the strategic importance of Libya must not be undermined in its resources and oil reserve. It expands to its location and role in ensuring international trade, the security of oil, and other matters. Therefore, protecting Libya and its coastal and its coasts will ensure the stability of the Middle East and the paths of trade between Africa and Europe. As we have mentioned time and again, all what has been mentioned related to divisions or challenges on any files, especially when it comes to the Libyan citizen, whether economically, humanitarianly, or on the security sphere, are only symptoms, because we have not yet reached a fundamental and comprehensive political solution based on diversity and real democracy, a solution based on a constitution and a state of institutions and law that has its unified military and has full control over weapons to defend the people. This continued struggle for years came due to different foreign interferences. This crisis was used for particular proxy wars and specific agendas, and the proof is before your eyes in so many other countries. Therefore, we call upon you once again for positive international partnership, a partnership on equal footing that respects the will and sovereignty of the Libyan people. We would like to thank all countries who have adopted such approach, and we hope that others will follow and adjust their policies so that benefit would be for all. History will record that, and the Libyans will remember that. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Libya for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I'll now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussions on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.